Hello everyone, welcome to the first video for the Encoding YouTube channel. In this video we're going to be talking about WordPress and the bricks builder. We're going to be focusing on creating some of the functionality, not the entire website, some of the functionality for a Brixies or Bricks Maven style layout library, where you can browse some layouts for your own personal use and then copy them to the clipboard and use them in your projects. It's aimed at people who really are beginners when it comes to coding and working with JavaScript and PHP, because we are going to be looking at some JavaScript and PHP. There's only one plugin in use, and that is a custom post type plugin, which we will look at, and we'll take a quick look at the custom post type in the setup, and then we'll have a look around the features of the site. Like I say, we're not going to be covering every aspect. We're just going to be covering the preview layout and the copy button. Everything else is just a bit of gravy on top. If you want me to discuss any of it, then let me know in the comments, and I'll make more videos around this and even like flesh this site out a bit more and make it a bit more of a full product. Okay, so let's have a look around. We'll start off by taking a little quick dive into the custom post type. We'll have a little look at this hero section one and see what we've got. A title. You'll see over here in a moment, you've got a featured image, we've got some categories, and the important bit is this JSON, the layout JSON. So when you copy a layout in Bricks, this is what you're copying, and when you paste it, this is what you're pasting in. So that's that there. And what we'll quickly do now is we'll go and a little look at the plugin I'm using, which is ACPT. This is my plugin of choice. You can use any custom post type plugin. However, if you are looking for one, it's very good for value for money, and I've got an affiliate link in the description below, which I'd be very grateful if you used, as it will help support the channel. So let's go and have a quick look over here and start off with, we've got the Bricks layouts custom post type. There's not really a lot to see in here. The one thing is I've got the support. It supports title, editor, thumbnail, excerpt, author, and custom fields, although I think that can be switched off. And then that's that. Taxonomies, I've got one taxonomy set up, and that's the layout category. And then we've got a field group, and we're going to have a little look at that. And we've got a meta box here containing any fields that are associated with this post type, and they are the layout JSON that you've already looked at, and then there's one down here for a URL, which I'm kind of using that as a place to store a link to the page that perhaps influenced your creation of this layout. Something that's important, we're going to want later on this layout details, the meta box name of layout details and the field name of layout JSON. We'll need that later. Make note of it. So let's go and have a little look at the front end now. Here is the library, and this is just a standard kind of archive view in Bricks. We got a button up here which will take you to a new post, so you can start one directly from the library. We've got this edit button here, which will enable you to edit this directly from the library view. So there you go, you can go in and edit this now. We've got the copy, which will copy the JSON to the clipboard. And then we've got the preview. And again, we've got a copy button down here and an edit button down here. So doing the two the same as before. We've also got these buttons here, which allow you to see what the layout will look like on different screen sizes. We're not going to look at these in the video. This is something for another day. So if you do want to know how to do this, leave some comments below and I will happily make a video on it. The edit button is something else we're not going to focus on. We're just going to focus on this layout, which is an iframe. So this is a page within the page. This outer page is just an ordinary page. This is a post. So we'll have a little look at that later. I've disabled it, but ordinarily you would see a second admin bar here because this is a page within a page. But I have disabled it for this particular post type. I haven't had to do it specifically for the iframe. If you know how to disable the admin bar for any pages or post types, then you'll know what to do. You can normally do that, I think, out of the box just for roles, so you can specify that certain roles don't have access to this. But we will look at how we disable that as a little bonus feature. So that's kind of a whistle-stop tour of the product. What we're going to do next is going to jump into the Bricks Builder and take a little look at what we've done in there. Before we do that, I want you to take note of this up here. So I've created some URL parameters. I've attached it. When we click the preview button, we'll look at it later in a bit more detail, but basically we've attached these parameters to the end of the URL. One is layout, which refers to the slug essentially. That there is dynamic data of post slug, so we get that. And layout ID is dynamic data of post ID. So just make note of that, as we'll need that later on. What I'm going to do is this. Let's open this in a new tab. Close some of these other tabs. Okay, so here is the page, and what we're doing is we've got a query loop attached to this section, and this query loop looks at a custom WordPress post query, and so this is kind of pretty standard format for that. We wouldn't normally just say that. This is a bit of a kind of a wrapper around this functionality, I think. So the first thing we're doing is we're getting the name of this post that we want to view inside this iframe, and as I said, that we get the name of that from here. So layout equals layout 2. So where's it gone? So that name, we're using a dynamic data type of URL parameter, and then we say colon, and then we say the URL parameter that we want to get the value for, and it's layout. And we assign that to this variable name. We could call this whatever we want. It hasn't got to be called name. It can be called anything in this instance here. And then what we do is we ask it to return the results of a WordPress post query where the parameters for it are post type of bricks layouts and a name of whatever that layout name is. And then that reduces this down to one single post, assuming that all your layouts have unique names. And that's going to be an important factor. We could just as easily use post ID in fairness, but I've gone with name. So post ID would guarantee you a single value in the instance where you've got multiple layouts with the same name. But hopefully every layout's got its own name. So what that does is return that single post for that layout. So as we go down, we've got our heading, the post title, we've got those buttons, which like I say, we're not going to look at those this time round. And then we've got the layout preview where we find our iframe. Now, Bricks doesn't have an iframe, at least as far as I'm aware anyway. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but what I did do was I just basically turned a div into an iframe. And the way we do that is we insert a div and we come into the content, and under HTML tag, we can choose different HTML tags, but we can't choose like any. It's not a comprehensive list. What we have got is custom. And when we choose custom, then we can specify any HTML tag. And when we say custom, this is a legitimate HTML tag that we can use. It's not a made up one. It is a legitimate one. So if you need to know more about iframe, you can go and look that up on the internet, and you'll be able to find all the information you need to about iframes. Now, Bricks doesn't know about iframes, so there's nothing in here specific to an iframe, and we do need at least one attribute assigned, and that is the source. The source for this iframe is the post URL that we're looking at, the layout we're looking at. So that the post URL. And what we do is we assign an attribute, we give it a name of src for source, and then the dynamic data is post URL. Okay. So that's the iframe. Now we're going to look at the copy button. And the one thing I have done with this is I haven't left it as like a standard Bricks button, because a standard Bricks button isn't a button. It's either a span, it's something that looks like a button, but it's not a button. And so again, I've specified a HTML tag of button here. Now that's not imperative, you haven't got to do that, but I like to do that because that makes it, that's more accurate. That's the right thing to do. So a HTML button is in use there. What I have done is I've come in here and I've set an attribute to it, and I've set it as a data attribute, and that's important later on when it comes to the JavaScript. We will refer to this as the data set, and that's a specific JavaScript functionality that then reads any attribute that starts data dash. So, and then I've called it layout ID, and then that value comes from, once again, we're using that dynamic data of URL parameter, and we're specifying this time the layout ID and not just the layout. And the layout ID, was it 173, 174? So here we go, layout ID equals 174. So that's what that is there, and that's now assigned to that button. Let's go and have a quick look at that button. Right click on the button, press inspect, and we can look at the HTML. And here we go. Here's that data, layout ID equals 174. Okay. And just to be clear, that's not, this year facilitates that happening, but it's not taking it from there when we right click. When this button is rendered, we look at that and we insert it into there. But once it's there, we can delete that. It no longer matters. It will still say data layout ID 174. That's now been assigned. So that's this page, and I think that's all we're going to look at. The only other thing I guess that might be worthwhile looking at is going into here and the preview. And so let's edit that with Bricks and just quickly see how I did that. So preview, and so we got, this is a button, so, and we've set a link type on it to dynamic data, and all we've done is it's the full external URL of our website, layout preview of that page specifically, sorry, and then we've attached the URL parameters that we want, and then like I said before, so we've got layout equals, and then that dynamic data type of post slug, and then we've got an ampersand symbol, and then we say layout ID equals, and then that dynamic data type of post ID. And then when we do that and it renders, this link will take us to that page. So let's come back out of here. So that's the basic setup of this now. That's showing you how it all works. The next thing is going to be looking at how we did it. To do that, we need to write some code. And this is where it all gets a bit interesting for anybody who is interested to learn to write JavaScript or PHP. This, of course, is not going to be a lesson in JavaScript or PHP, but you are going to get a taste of both those subjects. So for your awareness, I am using Visual Studio Code for this, and it's connected to my server. I have a remote server that I run myself. I don't get my hosting from a hosting provider like Hostinger or GoDaddy or whatever. So I've got a bit of a different setup than perhaps you have or not. And so what you need to be able to do is access your file system on your hosting provider. If you're using cPanel, the way to do that is to go into your cPanel and then find the section for browsing files. I can't quite remember what it's called, file browser or something like that. And you can go in and you can navigate your files and you can edit your files. What I might do for you, just in case you're unaware of that, I won't create a video. I'll find a video that shows you how to do that, and then you will be able to follow along with me. When you get there, what you want to do, mine's called WordPress, but that's not standard at all. It isn't. This should be called public_HTML, if I remember rightly, is what you will find anyway. And so once you're in there, you're going to go to WP content, and then you're going to go to themes here, and then you're going to go to the Bricks Child theme. And that's just something to note before you go any further. You do need the Bricks Child theme active. Now, if you haven't already got it active and you've done certain things, you might find that you need to do some work to activate that. So if you haven't activated it, get that done before you go any further, and then come back. Right, so there's the Bricks Child theme. The first thing we're interested in, and what you will find in here by default, I'm going to delete that debug log. I don't want that. I'm also going to delete that screenshot. I don't want that. Sorry, I should have done this before. So the thing you're going to find in here is you're going to find functions, functions.php, and that's I think that's all you'll find in here. Custom endpoints I created, assets I created, elements. I think I might have created that too. Well, I might not have. But it's functions.php you're looking for. And you're going to open that, and this is what you're not going to see quite this. You're going to see something perhaps a little different. Let me just get my bearings as to where I am in this file. Yeah, okay, so that's the start. That's one thing we're going to need. And then the other thing is you're going to need to create a JavaScript file yourself. And that's dead easy. You just create files and you create folders. It's up to you where you place it. I have placed it in this structure because that's kind of like standard practice. That if you've got JavaScript and you put in a JS folder which belongs in an assets folder, you haven't got to do that. That's just best practice, like I say. But nothing will stop working if you don't do that. But you will need to adapt some of this code to account for where you do put it. Okay? When you do create folders within here, one of the things you must do is create an index.php file in every folder that you create. And this is a security measure. There's nothing in this file other than the starting PHP tag. So whenever you create a PHP file, you have to open the PHP, have an opening PHP tag. This here is just a comment. It offers no functionality. It cannot be seen on the front end. If you browse this page, it is invisible to the end user. It's just something that you'll find scattered throughout WordPress. These index files exist all over the place, and they have silences golden. It's just a little tradition, or whatever you want to call it, that happens within the WordPress community. So you need that in every folder that you create. It doesn't do anything. It just protects that folder. So we've got, let's close that. Let's close that. So we've got our JS file and we've got our functions file. The first thing we're going to look at is we're going to look at the PHP. The first thing we look at is going to be the PHP. And I'm going to start off with a little bonus feature, and that was how to remove the admin bar. I'm going to quickly demonstrate it with the admin bar. So here's that bit of functionality. I'm also going to reorganize this a little bit because it just makes more sense to do so. I'm just going to paste that back in down there. So that's that done. So this hide admin bar for bricks layouts is a custom function. It's a very simple little custom function. Whenever we add a custom function to our theme and we want to execute it, we have to ordinarily do this. Basically this add filter is a WordPress function which attaches your function. So use your function name. So this year refers to this here. It's going to attach this to this hook, this WordPress hook. So this has to be called whatever you can. There's a number of things that it can be. You know, here we've got add filter, show admin. We've got another add filter here. I'm going to move that add filter just so it's consistently below the function. This filter is for REST authentication errors. You know, so these things are things that we have to choose from. But this can be anything. We can call our functions anything we want as long as it's not these. These are already taken. Function name must be unique, but it hasn't got to be anything specific. The rules are, I suggest you go and look, if you're interested in knowing any of this, is look it up online about naming PHP functions. But the basic gist of it is, it should start with a letter. The only way to space out words is with an underscore. You can have numbers, but it can't be the first character. And so yes, that's kind of a basic rule of thumb when it comes to naming PHP functions. And what we're doing is, this year is a variable. It doesn't matter what this is called. We can call this anything, but when WordPress calls this function, it's passing in a value, and it's a Boolean value, which means it can either be true or it can be false. And we will reference that value by that word show. And the default behavior is to show the admin bar on all pages, yeah? And that's why we called it show. We could call it show admin bar, and that would be perfectly acceptable. Nothing wrong with that at all. And it perhaps, strictly speaking, when we think about how we should name files as best practices, it should be quite descriptive. So functions or variables. So I'm going to do that. Show admin bar. Okay. And that's perfectly acceptable. We can call it anything at all, but that's what we're calling it. And so that equals true or false based on, well, the default is true. And what we're saying is, if this is a post, singular, well, it can refer to two things, a post or a page. And that post is a post type of bricks layouts. If that is the case, then return false. And what we mean by return is, that's the output of this function. So a function doesn't always output something. Sometimes it just does something, but quite often it will return or output something. And that's what we mean by return. And we're returning or outputting the term false, which means to not show the admin bar, to hide the admin bar. If this statement isn't true, as in it is not a single page or not a post, or it is a post and it's not called bricks layouts, then skip this and return this instead. Thing to note is, when we do return something, that's it, it's the end of the function. So if this is true and we return this, that's the end of the function. If this is false, we skip over this and we go to this line, which is another return statement, and so this ends the function. It just so happens to be that this is the end of the function, so, you know, it's got to end here anyway, but, you know, that's what that's doing. So that's your bonus item. That's how we hide the admin bar. And let's move that out of the way. Let's go to the top of this now. Let's bring these a little closer together, just because they are associated. You can have as much space between yours as you like, but here we go. So the first thing we're going to do is we are going to register we need an endpoint basically. We need a custom endpoint that we can, when we click on that button, we're going to call a JavaScript function that reaches out to the WordPress API to a endpoint that we're going to create and register here. And then that endpoint is going to return our JSON data, which is then going to be copied into our clipboard. And so the first thing we need to do is register that endpoint. Okay, so this is what this function does, and we're adding an action. The action we're adding, the hook we're adding it to is the REST API init function or hook, and then we're adding this function that we've created, and again we can call it what we want. It just needs to make sense to us, and so that's what we're doing. And let's go through this now, creating a couple of variables here just to make it a little easier to understand what's going on down here. Perhaps, maybe not, but it makes sense to me, so hopefully it'll make sense to you. So namespace is this is part of your URL for that endpoint, the first part of it, and this is the second part. This is the route. And what we mean by namespace is, I'm not going to use this as an example because I'm not quite sure how else we would use this. But if we were dealing with users, let's do that. Let's change this to users or user, and let's say get user. Okay, so that might get, and let's say get user by ID. So that they would return a user. So the namespace here is user. So that means we're talking about users. We can call these namespace anything we want. We're going to make this name up. The version 1 is optional. We can leave that if we want. It's just so that if we create any new versions of this in the future, we can keep running the original version. You'll see that a lot in APIs, that there'll be version 1, 2, 3, 4. The old versions will keep running to ensure that anybody, any websites or pages that use this as it is, don't suddenly stop working. So you can include v1 or not include it. That's entirely up to you. If you took it off, you would take it back to there, yeah? So, and what we, just to sort of clarify what we mean by namespace, is if we was to create the next function here, which might be, Copilot's not being very clever here. Let's say register user. Yeah, and then the next line is going to be update user, and the next line is going to be delete user. And that's probably going to be all we would do with a user. But the one thing they all have in common is there is this reference to user at the end, but that's just, it's just the way it is. We might actually, another way of doing it is just say register, delete, and that's also valid. The namespace is this, and this is common throughout it all. And so, although we're not doing anything as complicated as this, we still need a namespace. So our namespace in this case is Bricks Layouts version 1. And then we've got our route is get layout. We haven't got any other routes. It's very simple, but we could create multiple routes. And so this is where we register that. That's just a variable containing those values, and we're going to use them down here. So in this register REST route function, we need 3 parameters. The namespace goes here, the route goes here, and the options go here. And the options is an array. An array is like a list of things. This is a particular kind of array, what we call an associative array, which isn't just a list of words or numbers as an ordinary array would be. This is a list of key value pairs. So this is a key and this is a value. This is a key, this is a value, this is a key, and this is a value. So this is basically telling the route what kind of request to expect and the method of the request. In this instance is post. I'm not going to go into the other options. They're not a huge list, but if you did want to go into understanding what the different methods are, you need to look at HTTP requests or request types or methods. Any of those, but it's HTTP requests. Look that up. The next one is a callback. Now a callback is essentially a function, and what it's saying is when this route is visited or requested, run this function here, which is down here. And then the last one is permission callback. So again, callback, hopefully you get that that's a function, but this is the permissions function or callback. And that there is this here. So we've got two functions that we're going to run, even though it's in a different order. In fact, I'm going to change the order of these because it makes more sense. We're going to check for permission first, and then we're going to actually do the work. Okay, so that makes more sense. It doesn't matter which order we put it in, it's just an array and it'll work regardless, but visually that just makes more sense. Let's look at the permissions callback. We're gonna here is that permission call. So let's look at the permissions callback. First thing is when the WordPress calls this callback, it's going to pass in what is the request. So when we click that button, it's going to make a request, and we're going to get the details of that request. And there's all kinds of information. We'll have a little look at some of it later on. There's all kinds of information attached to that request. There can be more, there can be less, but there's all kinds of information attached to that request. And in the instance of the permission callback, we are interested in what is attached to the request headers, and we're interested in the XWP nonce, and this is like a cookie almost. Ordinarily, it is stored in a cookie when you log in. A nonce gets stored in a cookie, and that cookie gets checked for automatically. But we are checking for it manually this way because we're passing it in a post request via what you're gonna learn to be as a fetch request. So we're assigning whatever this is. So the request, we're saying, look at the request, get the header called XWP nonce, and there's lots of header key value pairs. It's this one we're after, and we store it in this field here called nonce. And now what we do is we do a check to see if that nonce is valid. We'll see how we get the nonce a little bit later on. We have to create a nonce and we have to check for a nonce. This is us checking for the nonce. In the minute when we set up the JavaScript file, we'll see how we set up the nonce. So we're going to say if not, that's the exclamation mark there. That's how we say if something is not true. So what this will equal, this function based on what we pass into it, the nonce, and this is a unique ID for this nonce to get stored in WordPress. So this is how WordPress identifies this nonce. So what it's going to do is it's going to look for a nonce in its database. Whoops, let's not move that around. Called WP REST bricks layout. Again, we can call this whatever we want. This is just a unique name that we come up with. And really, it's only got to make sense to WordPress, but we're typing it, we're maintaining it, so it's also got to make sense to us. And then that's the actual nonce. And I'll show you what the nonce looks like. It's just a small, I'm not sure if it's a 12 or 16 character, just like a code. And it's saying, check this nonce against this. Go and get the nonce out for this record and check that this is the same. If it's not the same, that means we've got a expired or invalid nonce. Then return a WordPress error with a status code of, actually this should be 403. If all is good and our nonce passes the test, skip this and just return true. That means whoever's making this request has permission. Now this permissions callback can be more complicated than that. You could put a further test in here to test if the person's logged in or if the person has a specific role. So we can make this more complicated. This essentially lets anybody make a request to this endpoint, whether they're logged in or not. It doesn't matter what role they've got, but we can extend that functionality. Again, we can look to how we might do that in future videos. Once this is, assuming this returns true and all is good and the nonce is okay and we've got permission to go ahead, this is the function that will be referred to up here. No, not there, sorry. The callback is, we're going to call this. And again, WordPress passes in the request, which gives us access to all of the details of the request. And there's only one thing we're interested in from that request. And we're going to assign to that variable here that we're calling post ID. Remember, a variable can be called whatever we want, but we're calling it post ID. We're looking at the request and we're asking it to return a parameter. So get parameter, and that parameter is called post ID. And that post ID is essentially the layout ID we looked at before. Obviously a layout ID is just really a post ID, so it's just depending upon how you look at it. I should have really just named it all post ID to save confusion, but on the front end I've called it layout ID, on the back end I've called it a post ID. And when we go looking for the post, we do have to refer to it as a post ID and not a layout ID, because WordPress doesn't know about layout IDs, it only knows about post IDs. So get the post ID from the parameters that are passed back that are in the request and assign it to there. We're going to assign this meta key variable. We're going to assign this value here to the meta key variable. Layout details, layout JSON. If you remember rightly, I told you to make note of this earlier on in the video. This is the meta box name for our ACPT custom fields, and this is the meta box, and this is the custom field name where the JSON is, separated by an underscore. So we're just storing that value in here. We're going to use it in a minute. First, though, before we do use it, we're just going to check that we've got a post ID. In fact, let's not even bother doing that until we've confirmed we've got a post ID. Let's move that down there. Let's first check for a post ID. Assuming we've got one, we will then assign that meta key to what we know to be layout details underscore layout JSON. And just in case there's any doubt as to where that came from, layout details underscore layout JSON. Okay, so there's that. And now what we're going to do is we're going to use a WordPress function called getPostMeta. And so that's going to go and get us some metadata from the post. We're going to use that post ID that we got from the request, and we're going to say, we're saying for the post with the ID of post ID, get the value from this meta key. Okay. True. This is the question here. It can be true or false. The answer is true or false. The question that this pertains to is this a single value response that you're expecting? In other words, is it just one value, or is it an array of values, so multiple values that you expect back? That doesn't mean multiple words, that means a list of things, an array. And if it's a single value, it's true. If it's an array, it's false. And an array would be where if you had a custom field that was like some checkboxes or some, let's take the categories, for example, or tags. You could have multiple categories or tags associated with it, so that would come back as an array. Even if there's only one value or a tag associated with it, it would be an array with just one item in it. So it's still in an array. But if it's not one of those type of fields and all we've got is just a normal string, then it's a single value. And so we say true. So this now equals our JSON string. That's retrieved. We've assumed we've got the post ID, assuming this field exists, which we know it to exist. When we get that post meta, we're getting the meta information for that post ID. It's a single value, so that's now going to be stored in that there. We're just going to check that it is. So we're saying if it's empty, that JSON value, then return an error, a 404 error to say it wasn't found. But with a bit of luck and fair wind, we will have a JSON value. And so we will return that, and that's what will get sent back to our JavaScript as a JSON decoded value. So the JSON will be converted into a format that's safe to send back via that request. So that's the endpoint all set up and ready to go. The next thing is to worry about is the JavaScript. So with that, we've got a couple of things we need to do. We've actually got the JavaScript, but before we handle that, here is the JavaScript. There's not a lot, look. There's more comments than there is code, I think. Perhaps not, and that's what these are. These are just comments. They don't offer any functionality. They're just notes for you to understand what's being written. There's a little bit we've got to do in here to what we call we enqueue it, and this is where we create the nonce we spoke of earlier on. And so where we did a check for the nonce here, we are now going to queue up, enqueue and queue up the JSON, the JavaScript file, make WordPress aware of it, and associate a nonce with it. Okay, so we're going to add a new action, which is WP enqueue scripts. So there's the hook, and we're going to attach this function to that. And what this function is going to do is we've got a handle, and the handle is a unique identifier. Let's get our HTML heads on a minute. If you understand the concept that HTML tag has an ID attribute, well, that's what this is. This is going to be the ID that's associated or assigned to the JavaScript script tag in our HTML. And this will allow WordPress to deregister this if it needs to later on. So that's the handle. The source is essentially the JSON, the JavaScript file. So when I said to you, I created this assets folder and this JS folder, and I created this file, that's what we're referring to. If you're gonna just store this file in the Bricks child folder, which is perfectly valid, then you need to change this so that it's no longer looking at assets.js. What this equals, and it's a bit of a, I need to understand this more. I don't understand why this is the case. I'm sure there's a reason. This basically gets us to our theme, but it doesn't get us to the child theme that we're using. It gets us to the parent theme. And the child theme is if we look, it's in the same location, except our parent is called Bricks and our child is called Bricks-child. So we need to concatenate on -child, because here gets us as far as, so that get template directory is that, and then we concatenate on that. Okay, or whatever, you need that no matter what. And then the question is, have you used it, stored it in assets.js, or have you just stored it directly in the child folder? Both are valid. Like I say, what I've done is best practice, but it's perfectly valid to not bother with those extra folders. So that's our source. That's the JavaScript. That's us enabling us to tell WordPress about that. And that's what we're going to do next. We're going to queue it up. So these are just, like I say, just a variable. Just a variable, doesn't do anything. It just stores some information. This here is the function. And what we're doing is we're passing in the handle. We're passing in the source. We've got an array here, which are dependencies. If we were using jQuery, that would be an example of something going in here. or any other JavaScript dependencies that we might have. This is our version number. I've just named it version 0.1, and this year is whether or not you want this to reside in the footer at the bottom of the page. And that's typically best practice with JavaScript, is to place things at the bottom of the page. You can put things at the top, and there may be times where you have to, but typically speaking, I tend to put my JavaScript at the bottom of the page. So now we've told WordPress about it, we now need to localize it. And what that really means in a practical sense is this is telling WordPress about our JavaScript file that we've created. This is now going to create a JavaScript file. It's a very small JavaScript file that contains one thing, and that is a JSON object. And there's the object name we're going to store. That's the object name stored in this variable object name. So this can be anything we want. This can be anything we want. It doesn't matter. I'm calling it object name because that's what it is. But it's only just a name. It's a variable, so we can call it what we like, whatever makes sense to you. We are telling this about this year, the unique ID, the script file or the script tags that we're associating this with. So they both are introduced to each other. There's the object name, and this is the object. This is a PHP array, not a JSON data, but this function converts it to a JSON object. And what this contains is, we could change the end of this. So we could say, and I'm going to, endpoint URL. Okay. So this is the endpoint for that URL, and this here is the same as namespace plus route. So Bricks layout version 1 get layout. Yeah, go back here, where were we? Not that one. Oh, we've gone down too far, have we? Yes, here we go. Bricks layouts version 1 get layout. So that's we're telling WordPress that's storing that URL for us, and then the nonce, we're creating the nonce here, and we're giving it that unique name. And so this name here, it can be anything we want, but it has to match this name here in the permission check, in that permission callback where we verify, it needs to match that. Okay, so that's the end of that. Yep, that's that done. So we've queued up our JavaScript file. It's ready to go. Before we get into looking at the JavaScript file, I'm going to look at one last thing on this page, and this is to disable the standard nonce check, which is normally associated with logging into WordPress and doing a check for you being logged in. It's looking for a nonce in a cookie, and without this function, this whole thing will fail, because WordPress will do a check for the nonce in cookies, and we haven't created a cookie for that, so there won't be a valid nonce in the cookies. So what this function does, I can sit here and explain it if you want, but essentially what we're doing here is this function disables the standard nonce check for when we make a request to this endpoint. That's what this is doing. That's what this check is here. It's asking if this is the endpoint, then yes, disable the default check. So that's the last thing on the PHP page. This down here was to hide the admin bar. You've already seen that. So now, like I said before, we've queued up our JavaScript file. We can now go and look at the JavaScript file. I made a few tweaks to this, so I'm going to save it. Hopefully I've remembered to do everything I need to do, because when we test it, if I've not, it's going to be broken. Right, let's go and jump into that JavaScript file. So let's start off here at the top. The first thing we're doing is, even though we're loading this at the bottom of the page, we're just saying on the document, so the whole web page, yeah, add an event listener. And what that means is listen for certain events that occur on objects. Anything on a page can have certain events happen on it. Not every object on a page has all of the same events that can occur, but there is some crossover with them. One of them that's on the web page itself is the DOM content loaded. Once that event is triggered, we're going to trigger this function here, which is going to register all our other functionality. Okay. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to bear in mind now we've made the switch from PHP into JavaScript, yeah? So the way we do variables is slightly different. There's no $sign at the beginning. We use one of 3 keywords, var for variable. This is a constant variable, and one that I've not put in yet is a let variable. If all else fails, use var, okay? But const is what I tend to use mostly, and I sometimes use let. The big difference between let and const is const variables can't be changed. Once you register them, that's it, they're registered. If they're empty at the start, they will always be empty. If they've got a value in there, they will always have that value. So I can't say that the URL is this here and then later on assign a new URL to it. And that's bad practice anyway, and that's why I tend to use const, because once I assign a value to something, there are certain scenarios, but generally speaking, when I assign a value to a variable, that's what I want it to be, except when I don't. But, you know, that's what lets are for, or VARs. If you want to learn more about them, I would suggest you go and look up on them, because I was such a brief, didn't do it any favours at all. It was a very brief description of what the differences are. VAR, const, and the third one is let. Right? So, assign get bricks layout JSON buttons. That's the variable. We want to go and assign to this all buttons with this class. Okay? So, we know it's a class. So, what we're saying is document, query selector all. So what that means, query selector, is to go and look at the web page, the DOM as we call it, the document object model, query selector, and we're saying query selector all, which suggests there's more than one of these things. We also got query selector, which means we will only get the first one of something that we're looking for. And we would typically only use that when we only expect to find one. But if there is more than one, we will get the first one when we choose query selector. But we're saying query selector all, and we're looking for this. So this is a class. I'm sure you're aware of what classes are working with bricks, but let's go and have a quick look at. Let's look at it on this page, yeah, because we've got multiple, and that's the point of why we're saying query selector all. On the preview page, it's only one, so we could have just used query selector, but because we're using it here also, where we will have many copy buttons, inspect, and the class is, what did I say it was? Get bricks layout JSON button. So find every object on the page with that class. And so we've now got a list of HTML elements with that class name. Now, just to be clear, whether we've got 1 or we've got 10, it's still a list. It's not a single object. I mean, we know it to be a single object, but it's a list of objects. It just, because we've used query all and not selector all and not just selector, it will always be a list. And that's important. Give me a moment why that's important. So the first thing we're going to do is check to see if we found any of those buttons. So what we're saying here is this something and not nothing? Because if there was no buttons on the page with that class, then it would be nothing. It'd be a null value. It'd be nothing returned, and so this would be false. If it's true though, we found some buttons, then we want to process each one of those buttons. And that's why it's important that we understand that whether this is 1 or 2, 1 or 10 or 100, this is a list. And we're going to go over that list one by one. And if it just happens to be 1, then it's just 1. If we did query selector, then we only expect a literal 1, a single item. Then we wouldn't do this for each. We would just directly interact with this. But because we're using query selector all, because we expect many buttons in some instances, we have to loop over each of those buttons. And what we do there is we say for each, do this function. So this now is another function. Did I call it function up here rather than use arrow function? So this is a different way of writing functions, and for your benefit and to keep things consistent, I am going to write it the same way in both instances. So let's do that function. And there's this argument passed in that's essentially the single instance that we're looping on. So this is a loop, yes. We're going to go one button and then loops the next button and then loops the next button. And this function is passed in whatever that object is we're looping on. And so this is going to be a single instance of the button. We might have 3. And each time we go around, it's going to assign this variable button, yeah? This a variable button, a new button. So let's skip down there. Let's add that comment in. So now we're going to interact with that button. We're going to say add an event listener to that button, and the event listener in this instance is click. What that means is anytime you click on it, we're going to do something. This here is a keyword that's important because we're making fetch requests. It needs to be an asynchronous function. Bit of a complex thing to get our heads around. So let's not try and learn about asynchronous functions today. Let's just roll with it. And trust me that we've got to use it, and I'll show you where it comes into play. I would suggest if you're interested in learning about JavaScript, you do learn about asynchronous functions or async functions. And there's a couple of ways of writing. You'll probably see it written a different way, but I write it the way I write it. It's a more modern way. Some people like to write it using promises. Let's not get into that. I'm just confusing things. Let's just get on with the code. So this is an async function, so another function within all of this. And this time, this is our last nested function, if you like. All we're going to do now is we're just going to get on with the work. Yeah, we're going to get on with doing what we want to do. So you're clicking the button. We're going to run this function. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to get the layout ID. And that, if you remember, comes from, if we go into, we got it open anywhere? Yes, we have. We attached the attribute, data layout ID, and we got that from the URL parameters, layout ID. This here, from this page, yeah. So data set is where we put data dash. It knows to go to find everything with that, every attribute that starts data. And we say dot layout ID. Now, let's just jump back to that a minute. You'll notice that we wrote layout ID as layout dash ID. That format is not valid here. We cannot write this. We can't write that. But JavaScript knows what we mean by that. When we write it like that as layout with an all undercase, lowercase, sorry, and then we write the beginning of each new word with a capital letter, it knows that to look for a data set attribute with a dash in it. Okay, so we assigned that value. If I remember rightly, it's 174. We deleted it, did we? Can we refresh it? There we go. It's 174. So that's now going to equal 174 because it's got that value from the dataset layout ID. We're setting a new value of URL. Now, here we're looking at, I'm going to jump back into the PHP and show you where this is coming from. And I will also jump into the HTML and show you where that ends up. So here, what we're looking at, if we go down, and no, we don't want that. We want to, where we enqueued it, yeah. We localized a script, yeah, and that script has got a handle, which is an ID. Of that, it's got an object name of bricks layout data. Bricks layout data. And then, oh, I changed this, didn't I, to endpoint URL. So let's copy that and put that there. So there's that. And then the other thing right below it is we've registered nonce and we've created a nonce. That bit doesn't matter, that's for WordPress. We don't need to worry about that in the JavaScript. That's just WordPress speak. But what we have done here is we've created a nonce, and what gets returned here is our code. So I'll show you that in a moment. And so we're assigning that value here. Let's jump out of here a minute and we'll go and have a look at where that is. Let's do inspect. And what we're going to do is down here somewhere. Let's just click on these three dots and put it at the bottom so we've got full width. And let's make this bigger. So script tags at the bottom of the page. So we're looking at the ones from the bottom and we're looking for an ID of, is this the one? And there you go. So bricks layout data, endpoint URL, and there's the URL. A bit of a strange format. That's just to do with the characters being used in it. It has to be escaped. But that's the URL. And there's the nonce. And that's what the nonce looks like. 86979 FCA04. That'll change every 24 hours. And so our function here, our JavaScript function here, is also loaded in, where is it? Here it is. It's just a reference to it, sorry. So we can't see it here. What we can do is jump to it here. How do we open a new tab? So there's our JavaScript that we're writing now, yeah? So because they're in proximity to each other, this one is above, so this can read. This one is the one we're writing. This is the one, where is it? This is the one generated by the WordPress. And so because this is below this, it can read this. That's the code that we're writing. And here we are back here. So that's where we're getting that information from. That's what we're referring to, okay? And then we're setting up some options. And all of this is going to go into our request. So all of this, the URL, the nonce, and the options are going to go into what we call our fetch request, which is how we make the request to the endpoint. So the URL is the endpoint URL, yeah. The nonce is what we need to pass to it to validate that we are legitimate, and the options are just some information about what we're doing. So the method is post, and if you remember rightly, we set that up in here, and we said methods post, so that the root, the endpoint now knows to expect a post method. Here's some headers that we're setting. There will be other headers automatically set, but these are ones that we're specifically setting. This is telling the endpoint to expect some JSON data, and here's our nonce being sent. So all of that gets wrapped up in the headers. And then the body is where we send our post ID and layout. Our post ID, which is equal to our layout ID. And that's where, did we... Yes, we did down here, isn't it? See here in our, when we did our callback, we registered the route, we mentioned the callback and this function, and this function gets the request, it gets the parameters and the post ID. that's where it's getting it from, the body essentially. And we can add more to this. We can add any number of other key and value pairs, and this can be as big as we need it to be, but all we're interested in this instance is just post ID, which is equal to the layout ID. And just for a reminder, I know I keep saying this and I sound like a broken record, but what that's referring to, it's been attached to the button, but that button got it from here. This layout ID here equals 174, yeah? So post ID actually equals 174 when we transmit it, and I'll show you that in the demonstration at the end when we monitor the results. So that's the URL, the nonce, and the options all set up, ready to go. These have not done anything. These are just all storing these values in these variables. We're now going to run a try catch. A try catch just says try to do something, and if it fails, catch the error and display it. Okay, so if it fails, that's what happens. Let's get back up here and let's hope that it actually works. Okay, so we got const response. Now the response is going to be equal to whatever this fetch request returns. And if you remember rightly, I talked about async functionality. Here's another keyword we must use in front of our fetch. So when we're making fetch requests, we must say await fetch. We pass in the URL, we pass in the options. Okay, the nonce is in the options. From there, we say, is the response, again, we use the explanation point at the beginning to say not. So is the response not okay? Essentially is what we're saying. That seems counterintuitive, perhaps the way it's written. Let's just write this a slightly different way. Response is not equal to true. What the hell? I can't type. That's another way of writing that. Not equal. But when we do this is shorthand for not equal true. So if this is false, if this is not okay, so our response was some kind of error, and throw an error message, which gets caught in our catch and is displayed. Okay. Hopefully that goes through okay. We haven't got to worry about that. We skip right on over it, and we're now going to get our data from the response. And again, we've got to use an await keyword here. We also got to use await here. Const data equals await response .json. So this is getting the JSON from the response. And again, we've got to use this await keyword for this. Now we're going to convert the JSON to a string format. So there's our JSON string. And then we're going to copy that text to the clipboard using await navigator clipboard write text JSON string. That's it, it's done. This bit here is just a bit where we get the alert. If the text was copied, then JSON copied, or copy JSON. If not, failed to copy. And I think that's about it. Let's go have a quick look, is it, and see what it's doing. So let's give the page a quick refresh. And I said to you we were going to inspect, and let's have a look at these network requests. Because that won't work well. The network request we won't be able to see properly like that. We'll put it over there. Let's go to the network tab. So you want this one here. I'm using Microsoft Edge in this instance. Chrome and Edge are basically the same thing. Edge is based on Chrome. Most browsers, all browsers have the ability to look at this information. Different browsers might go about it a slightly different way. If you're not using Chrome or Edge, you'll have to look at how you look at the developer tools for your browser, and then look at the network tab. It's looking pretty empty there now, and hopefully we haven't, with all our changes that we made, we haven't broken anything. Copy, and we have. The response was not okay. I'm going to pause the video and inspect that, okay? So 2 things wrong. Firstly, we didn't save it, and given that we changed the URL variable name, we really did need to save that because we weren't going anywhere. And then the other thing is I did make a little bit of a mistake down here. This actually shouldn't be a wait. This is the clipboard, copy the clipboard. I read somewhere that should be in a wait statement, but that does not work. So let's save that. Let's go back to our page. While we've got the developer window open, we can right click on the refresh button and we can do an empty cache and hard refresh. And that's quite often required when we make changes to our JavaScript or our CSS. It's just a good practice. And you can do that. You do that in most browsers, I think. The way I did it just now is something that's common in Chrome-based browsers. So Chrome, Edge, Brave, anything else is based on Chrome. We can just as long as we've got the developer windows open, right click on the refresh button and empty cache and hard refresh. Now, what are we looking at? Let's try now, is it? Copy. JSON copied. And let's go and have a little look at it. Here it is here. Here's the request and this is what we got back. And so this is what got returned. And this is what ended up being copied into our clipboard. So that's it. I know that video was quite long. I hope you found it helpful and that you'll be back for more. Like I said before, if there are any other additional components you want to look at, or you'd like me to go further into this, fleshing out this site even further, then let me know in the comments and I will do that. And of course, you know, if you did enjoy, please like and subscribe. Thanks very much.